Thank you. Thank you very much, Annette, and thank you, Andy Tabu, for that great speech. Good morning, everyone. We welcome each and every one of you to this. Of course, as the team of consultants, we were free, Mr. Lamin Damfa, myself, Baboucarr Nyang, and Ms. Dogen Job. Unfortunately, none of them is around, so I'll be the one to take this lead in giving a summary of our findings. Of course, this is also a follow-up to the validation workshop that we had and invited all the stakeholders and partners who were there to give their views and, of course, also as well give their concerns and comments and raise questions on the report. And it has already been validated, and today is the launch. Just to say, we've did this in a way that the cost of politics in the Gambia study was the first systematic documented evidence of on how financial, social, and structural barriers shape political participation, candidate competitiveness, gender inclusion, and democratic accountability in the country. So, of course, there have been some other studies in the sub-region in other countries, but again, this is the one that we found to be the most recent documented one that could show evidence, real data evidence on the cost of politics in the Gambia. So, drawing from a nationwide survey, we've interviewed political parties, look into financial reports of some of the parties and also review them by cases. And of course, again, also did a gender disaggregated analysis. So the research, of course, highlighted the rising cost of political engagement and its consequences to inclusive democracy, which of course we are very concerned with the findings of, and which us as the researchers were not biased in taking up these. So the summary, of course, details also the key findings and recommendations that emerge from the study. It is a written policy brief. And of course, we've engaged the political parties, civil society, development partners, and the general public at the official launch here. So we are happy to present the findings in summary. And first, one among them was the rising cost of political participation. The study finds out that the overall cost of politics or entering politics and sustaining political life in the Gambia has escalated significantly, creating substantial barriers among young people, first-time aspirants, women, and independent candidates. And during the study, we've also seen that there were key drivers to this, and the key drivers to this included and the party nomination fees. We've seen that there are party nomination fees. Some of them are 150,000 and above for some parties, which place aspirants under heavy financial pressures. And that also led to the campaign-related expenses, which includes transportation, fuel, communication, logistics, hiring agents, rallies, visibility materials, and media coverage. And of course, we have also known the informal and the hidden costs, such as the community contribution that comes, event sponsorship, and expectation-driven payments, which are not officially yet recorded, but with a heavy height on these aspirants. So within all those things also, we've realized that, this financial burden mean political participation is increasingly favoring individuals with personal wealth or aspirants of powerful network, and that trend to threaten political equality. Of course, why we are saying that, because if you are connected to somebody who has the wealth, who have the money, it's easy for him or her to sponsor you than you who are just struggling from your own funds or from funds of your family members to do that. So two among the things also we've seen is the gender barriers and added burdens on women aspirants. The study has also shown that the gender inclusive lenses of the study reveals women face disappropriately higher costs of political participation. Like, for example, owing social obligations and soft costs. For example, contribution on funerals, naming ceremonies, women groups, and religious events. The men can always say, oh, I don't think we care, we can stay, or we might not want to go. But the women, of course, if they are not seeing there, we've seen the social conditions that are attached to that. What they will say is, we did not see this woman, we did not see her in this, and that's now keeping a burden on the women to be more in for raising more funds. And of course, one of the things also is the party gatekeeping and biased nomination process, and of course where women are often asked to prove electability more than men Like, for example, if, according to the study, respondents said, if the women come with the man, the question will be, prove to us that you will be elected. And when the men come, of course, there will be no question of such in such areas. So that becomes also one of the things that is detrimental to having women elected in political positions. Harassment and intimidations, we've all seen that. Also, it also came in the study talking about the verbal abuse, cyberbullying, and of course, the sexist stereotypes that includes personal and financial cost of campaigning. Because, of course, when you are labeled, when you are abused, when you're, named, what you do is to prove yourself. And in proving yourself, it puts you more burden to be going more and more in getting to prove yourself. And, of course, during the study, one of the female candidates told us how that even made her go and get more loans and then become highly indebted just to prove that she was able to do it. And the economic barriers also were something that we've also seen in the study, where women already earning less than men on an average struggle to mobilize campaign resources, which was also there. And, combining all these factors significantly suppress women political participation, visibility, ambition, competitiveness, reinforcing existing gender gaps in leadership. And we have seen that even in the country, the number of women in National Assembly, number of women in the local government, among others. And even executive positions, for example, ministers who are women. So here we talk about the financial dependency, that weakening accountability, and the study has also highlighted that with the high campaign costs, this pushes aspirants into financial dependence on wealth. Elites, business owners, and informal networks creating conditions where, and it's very important, politicians may feel obligated to serve financial backers rather than constituents. Because if the financial burden is too high and you're demanding this from the elites, the business owners, or people who contribute to you, of course, what that means is you will be now serving those people who gave you the money rather than the constituency that you were elected. And then, of course, the political decision risks being influenced by financiers. We've seen, and with literatures, and even some of the respondents said that maybe people will be giving you the money in return of business favors when they're in those positions, or, giving them some form of advantages when you're in that form. So all these things, accountability and transparency will weaken the private interest, which will now overshadow public good. And that becomes so dangerous in our political sphere, which we are very much careful. If we are not careful, can take us to a way where we'll have a state capture. So this undermines democratic governance and public distrust. And of course, in those processes, we've seen that the youth, independents, and the marginalized groups are priced out. And, of course, including the women, because the research confirms that high political costs reduce diversity in political representation. And this is also seen in the youth and aspirants, of course, who lack the financial required to compete, because now with the increase of the cost for nomination fees, among other things, those youth who do not have the financial muscle and really want to represent their people will not now have the opportunity to participate, because they might not have the income that is required to place them into those positions. Independent candidates, of course, and we also know Gambia, independent candidates, face extremely disadvantaged due to the absence of party machinery and fundraising support. If you are under a political party, of course, the party can support you, pay the nomination fees, pay other fees, campaign and other, but if you are nominated, for instance, if this cost is so high, you will not be able to participate in that. And again, one of the things is the people or persons living with disability. They face structural and financial challenges that make campaigning significantly more expensive for them. And we all know, because of course, if you are a person with disability, you cannot be the person who will be going from door to door, house to house, for instance, looking for compared to somebody who's already having all those things. And again, the rural candidates face higher logistical costs than the urban counterparts, especially for transportation and mobilization, and this also came as of the questions that we were asking during the study. So these cost barriers deepen political exclusion and limit broader democratic participation, and one of them is its weak regulation of campaign financing. And the study highlights significant gap in campaign finance governance in this country. No enforceable ceilings on campaign spending, weak enforcement of political financial laws, minimal transparency on source of funding or expenditures, political parties' financial reporting obligation largely unmet. And then these regulations, of course, weakness allows money to influence politics without oversight. And of course, the study has revealed that all these things can influence the money to come into the politics. However it comes, we might not care, but again, it has a detrimental to the governance of our systems. So the political expectation fuel also cost pressures, and here we're talking about the community expectation, which inflate campaign costs. For example, people after voting for them or even wanting to vote for them, they will request for personal support, others will request for charity engagement, and even sponsorship from you. So constituents linking political loyalty to material support or patronage systems, also something that influence. And finally on that, political culture associated leadership with generosity over policy competence. And what here, for example, during the KII, one of the respondents told us that it is better for you to go and find somebody in his or her naming ceremony, give him 500, than to go to the National Assembly and advocate for them to have clean drinking water, for instance. So, that thing also is a systematic expectation from the public that undermines some of these political engagement on even democracy and accountability. So voters share concerns about money in politics. This is also the survey express serious concerns that money is increasingly determining who gets elected. And two, raising cost limits the emergence of credible candidates. And three, financial pressure lead elected officials to focus on recouping investment, affecting service delivery and accountability. Of course, we have seen that, and the study has highlighted these issues to say that, if the money is the one that determines who is elected, of course, people like me who might not be near to somebody who has the money will never have that candidate, and that might limit people who have credibility, people who can definitely win position to have those positions rather than, the money that will buy those positions in a nutshell. So the signal public demand for reform on this report was to ensure that elections are fair, competitive, and inclusive. And one of the recommendations for that was to establish clear campaign finance regulation. And in that, to introduce again the spending limits for aspirants, enforce mandatory disclosure of campaign funding sources, strengthening IEC's authority on political financing, and digitalize the reporting system for transparency and public access. Like one of the respondents also told us, during what do you have to tell us? He said, if we are saying that you cannot establish a political party in the name of, a tribe, in the name of a village, in the name of a constituent or whatever, because it's become a national entity. I think it's also fair for people to be disclosing financing that they have collected on behalf of those parties. So this is also one of the things that we are talking about here. And reduce financial barriers for women and youth. It's also one of the recommendations. And in that we said implement reduced nomination fees for women, youth, and PWD, that is persons living with disability candidates. Two, to create funding schemes or matching grants to support marginalized aspirants. And three, establish gender and inclusive funds within political parties. Four, provide capacity building on fundraising, communication, and digital campaigning for women and youth aspirants. So again, also the reforms in the reform in the internal party nomination process is also very important. And why this study is calling for that is to ensure transparency, merit-based, gender-sensitive selection criteria as one. Two, enforce minimum quotas for women and youth leadership positions. Encourage parties to adopt the code of conduct guidelines, protecting aspirants from intimidation and harassment. Of course, this has always come during the study where women talked about being harassed, intimidated when they are in these spaces, and of course, where we have men dominated in those political positions or leadership positions. So also another recommendation was to address the harassment and violence against women in politics by developing an enforced policy against online abuse, sexual harassment, and intimidation, provide legal, psychological, and security support to affected female aspirants, and finally, train law enforcement and party structures on gender-sensitive response strategies. Finally, strengthening civic education and voter awareness, promote shift away from patronage expectation towards just issue-based politics, and engage communities on the dangers of money-driven politics, empower citizens to hold accountability and transparency from candidates, and also support youth political engagement, enhance accessibility for PWD, encourage multi-party stakeholder reform. So in the conclusion of that, the course of politics in the Gambia revealed a critical insight. Democracy becomes less representative when political participation becomes expensive. The current trajectory risks, including women, youth, marginalized groups, and candidates without wealth, limiting competition, weakening accountability, and reinforcing elite dominance in this. However, the finding also show a strong foundation for reform, with targeted policy changes, increased transparency, fair nomination system, and intentional support for underrepresented groups. The Gambia can advance towards more inclusive, affordable, gender-responsive democracy. And of course, this research serves as a call for action to reduce financial barriers, broaden political participation, and so leadership become accessible to all Gambians, regardless to gender, income, and background. So thank you very much. That was the summary of the findings for this report. Thanks.